Hello and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're doing another 6.2 PTR preview. We are looking at the encounter Kilrogg Deadeye in the Hellfire Citadel.
And this fight isn't too bad, really. It's kind of, no, it is pretty terrible, let's be honest.
It's not terrible. It's just that the fact it is an ad management fight,
yeah.
And this guy is a warlord. He's supposed to be the coolest guy in here. Well, not necessarily, he's not the last boss or anything like that, but he's a bit dull.
Yeah, bless him. You pretty much spend the whole fight making sure none of the ads do what they're supposed to do while dealing with the basic mechanics of the boss, and that's pretty much the entire thing. But it's pretty cool. You do have like an alternative, like, sort of realm that you have to go into, because you kind of go inside of his eye socket, which is quite unique, I suppose. But apart from that, yeah, it's not too bad, I suppose.
And for the people that are new to our PTR style videos, this is only a preview of the boss. It's not an official guide. If you do want to see our official guides, they'll be up within the first week that these bosses are released on live servers. So let's start off and talk about the ads that you need to deal with throughout the entire fight. Now, salivating bloodthirsters will spawn on the left-hand side of the room, the right, and the back, and they'll sort of spawn out of caves. They'll start traveling towards a pool of blood that is located to where the boss initially starts. If they actually reach this blood, they'll turn into a new ad called Hulking Terrors. And these ads are really, really bad. So the idea is that you kill these bloodthirsters before they even reach it. Now, you can slow them, but you can't actually stun them. So as soon as they spawn, just get all your DPS to switch them. We actually had our DPS split into two groups. So one group could deal with the left, another group could deal with the right, and then both of them would switch to any ads that spawn at the back. And that's pretty much all you need to do with them. Now, one of the salivating bloodthirsters will actually spawn pretty much right on top of the pool, so you won't really have any time to deal with him, which means he will always turn into a Hulking Terror. Now, these Hulking Terrors will apply Fel Corruption to players, and this is displayed on an extra action bar. When you're affected by Fel Corruption, all it will do is just put a debuff on you that makes you take ticking damage, but the higher your corruption is, the more damage you'll take from it. Now, if your Fel Corruption does go to 100, we think you'll be mind controlled. We're not too sure about that. It says something like it in the dungeon journal.
Yeah.
But sadly, we never managed to get to 100. And the reason why we never managed to get to 100 is because your Fel Corruption actually slowly drops off you as the fight goes on. So, yeah, that's how that works. But the Hulking Terror himself, how he applies the Fel Corruption is that whatever tank is tanking him, every single one of the Terror's melee hits has a chance to apply a small amount. He also does something called Savage Strikes. This is just a frontal 90-degree cone that just does damage, which will also apply Fel Corruption. So tanks, make sure you're facing it away from the raid. Now, the main thing that sucks from these guys is an ability called Rendering Howl. This just does an absolutely absurd amount of damage to the entire raid in a single burst, followed by 10 seconds of ticking damage. However, this cast is interruptible. And when you do finally manage to kill one of these Hulking Terrors off, it will actually explode, dealing damage to the 5 closest enemies, and will also give them Fel Corruption. So really, from these Hulking Terrors, the only people that will be taking significant amount of Fel Corruption is the tanks, because there's 3 abilities that are targeted towards them. The melee will only get the one from the explosion. So you just need to make sure that you tank swap per Hulking Terror.
Now, Kilrogg isn't just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. He has got some abilities that you need to deal with, and the first of which is something that the tanks need to deal with, which is Shred Armor. This is a short cast on the tank that will increase the damage they take by 40% for 30 seconds, and this does stack up. However, if you have your active mitigation active when this ability lands, you will not receive the debuff. So pretty much you could have one tank this throughout the whole thing, but you kind of need 2 tanks because, you know, of that horrible Hulking Terror bastard that you need to keep switching on. Now, an ability for the whole raid to keep an eye on is something called Heartseeker. The boss will cast and place a debuff on a random target that lasts for 5 seconds. Once the 5 seconds are over, the boss will fire a projectile towards them. Now, this projectile pierces through targets, and the effect will hit all players that are hit. Now, the idea is that you make a clear path between the boss and the affected player, so, of course, only one person will be hit, which is the person who has the debuff. Now, when this player is hit, they will receive a physical damage dot that will need to be healed up, but the main thing is that a blood globule will spawn and start to travel towards the boss. Now, if it does reach the boss, the raid will take a big burst of AoE damage. So that's bad. The idea is that you do kill this globule as soon as possible. Once again, it can be slowed, but it cannot be stunned. And DPS, you 100% need to blow this up. This is kind of like #1 priority over anything else, because the amount of damage it does really does suck. Now, if a player is targeted by Heartseeker and they have any Fel Corruption, instead of a blood globule spawning, you'll have a Fel greedy version of it that's really horrible. Now, this ad has far more health, so it is much more difficult to kill it in time, and if it does reach the boss, the raid will take pretty much twice as much damage as the normal blood, and the boss will heal for 15% of its max health.
So that's a wipe, more or less.
Yes, 100%. Especially if any other AoE abilities go off at the same time this fella hits the boss, you're going to pretty much get one shot anyway, so the healing aspect doesn't even matter. Kill the blobs. The blobs are bad. Very simple.
Another ability that the boss has is something called Death Throes. This is a cast that just deals ticking damage to the entire raid for 8 seconds. However, the closer you are to the boss, the more damage you take, so melee get fucked. During this 8-second cast, the boss will also be spawning avoidable AoE circles on ranged players. If you don't avoid them, you'll pretty much be one hit, so it's very, very important that you move out of them. And every time the cast is finished, the boss will get a buff that increases the amount of damage that this ability does by 15%, and this will just stack up and up and up for the rest of the fight. So towards the end of the encounter, this pretty much forces you to be further and further away from the boss each time this ability is cast, especially when it's a lot later in the fight. However, there is something that can potentially make this ability a little bit easier to deal with, called Visions of Death.
Now this is an 8-second cast that will spawn 2 runes in front of the boss. Now if you have a player stood in each of these runes, they will be teleported to a brand new area. However, if there's no one who stands in these runes at all, the whole raid will take a giant massive AoE hit. So make sure you send some people inside the runes so they can fuck off to this brand new room. Now in this room you'll have 3 different types of ads that will come in waves and try and kill you, as well as Khadgar, who's just sitting there taking ticking damage and you can't heal him.
He don't really do anything, he just stands there.
He's just useless, bless him. But either way, he's there so you can say hello. Now the imps in here will cast Fellblaze. This is just a really long cast that if it isn't interrupted, it'll probably kill you. It's very similar to all the other imps in this expansion, so yeah, try and interrupt them or just kill them off before they kill you. You also have fiends that will explode when they die, dealing damage to you and spawning little AoE pools, so move from that, as well as you have some giant mistress blade lady who will cast a frontal cone breath, dealing ticking damage and applying a ticking damage dot as well. So the idea is that when you're in there, you kill everything off as soon as you possibly can.
Now each time you do kill one of any of these ads, both players inside will receive a buff that stacks. Now for DPS, the buff is just a flat 30% damage increase per stack, and the healing one is just a flat 10%. So you need to try and get as many stacks as you possibly can. And the only way to leave the room is when either you die, you won't physically die, you'll just be teleported out as soon as you reach 1 health, or when Khadgar dies. Now when a healer gets ported out, they'll get something called Cleansing Aura, which is a big ring around them. If players with Fell Corruption stand inside this circle, they'll actually have their Fell Corruption reduced. It's not very quick, but it could potentially be useful, but ultimately you don't really need it. At least we didn't think you did.
Now this Cleansing Aura could potentially also apply to ranged DPS. Like I did leave the room and I had like the buff for like half a second, then it just randomly disappeared. So maybe it's just PTR being a bit buggy and all that kind of stuff. So we'll have to see exactly how that works on live. But generally the idea is that you go in, kill a bunch of shit, come out, and then probably stack up with these Cleansing Auras to help the people who do have very high Fell Corruption. But until we actually see the fight fully working, it's going to be pretty hard to tell whether or not it's working properly.
Now, if you've been inside once, you won't actually be able to go back in again, as you also have a debuff that gives you a 1 million damage absorb shield, but makes you immune to Visions of Death. If you take that 1 million damage absorb shield off by just taking damage, then perhaps you could go back in again, but the buff you get that gives you crazy damage and healing does appear to have a cap, so you probably don't want to keep sending the same person in over and over again anyway. So to go back to the point about the Death Throes, if the boss is on low health, you probably would want to send a healer in for the Visions of Death, just to get stacks, so when they do use one of their healing cooldowns, they have a massive healing increase, and that should just counter the extra damage on Death Throes. But for the majority of the fight, if not the entire fight, really, you probably just want to send in 2 DPS every single time.
But that's pretty much it for
good from that point,
Kilrogg.
it's just repeat.
Yeah, it doesn't really seem to, you know, do much. I really like Death Throes. I think it's quite a cool mechanic, especially as a hunter, because I can run around even though nobody else can, because Rip Fox. But otherwise, I think it's generally a quite cool looking fight, but I found myself getting kind of a bit bored of it on PTR, which is worrying because, you know, I was on the fight for about an hour, and by the end of it I was kind of like, is that it? Is that all we're doing? We're kind of slowing ads, killing ads, and then 2 people every now and then get to go have fun in some room and come out and then do loads of damage.
If it was like half your raid that could go in and you take turns, then maybe that would be a little bit more interesting.
What was really good though for the people who did go inside, when they came out they had so much damage that they just pretty much one-shot the ads for you, which was great, but kind of boring for the rest of us. But either way, we'll have to see how the boss works out on live. I think it has a lot of potential, and really, I think we need to see what it is actually like when it's fully developed and ready to go.
But thank you very much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy this little PTR preview, then make sure you do drop us down a like, and if you go in the description, there is a link to a playlist with more PTR bosses, and we shall see you on the live stream. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.